Oh, hey there. Didn't see you there. I guess we could do this now. Well, welcome back to Sharing the Sawdust. My name's Alex. This is a mini-series all about game design where I am bringing an idea from in my head out into the real world for all of you to witness. Now, in the last episode, we talked about building the brainstorm, which is all about what you need to do in order to hold a proper ideation session before you even put that pen to paper. In this next episode, what we're going to cover today is the initial stages of prototyping, along with playtesting with friends and family. Simply put, we're going to be doing a lot of rapid prototyping, something that you can do for a very low budget, but not low effort necessarily. Now, without further ado, let's jump into what that looks like. You really thought that I wasn't gonna do a little sticky note slapper for you? Think again. Every time there's something. Okay. So you're probably wondering, what exactly does rapid prototyping entail? Well, simply put, it's simple, fast, and scrappy. You shouldn't be putting a lot of time or even a lot of money into this first round of prototypes because we're going broad here. We want to be exploring our previous sketches and ideations that we used in the last episode. So for us, that's something like our 3 towers here. See if that'll focus for a second. Now, with that means we're making these towers out of very simple materials. The only exception here is I'm using magnets, which are pricey no matter where you get them. It's something you just can't avoid with these types of models. But in other situations where people might run to a 3D printer or buy a custom part, we're seeing what we can make out of simply cardboard and hot glue. These are our friends, okay? You can knock out way more many models and learn many more things than designing something in SolidWorks and waiting 12 hours for it to print, only to realize that you made a mistake with the measurement or it just doesn't feel right in the hand. Doing rapid prototyping is such an easy and affordable way to get rapid learning with your users in an environment where they feel good to critique you. To show them a finished product and say, tell me everything that's wrong with it, is difficult for people, especially friends and family. So showing them a model that looks like it was put together by a child is much easier to critique and opens up a much better conversation. And I'll show you why in a second here.
It's the story of a UFO that has landed. Right now, somewhere on this planet, somewhere on this planet.
All right, so after a week of working on different approaches to these prototypes, here are the final 3 tower designs I have come up with. And you might be thinking these don't look anything like your sketches, and you're right, they don't. At this stage in the prototyping design, we don't want to be focusing on aesthetics. We want to be focusing more on the core idea of the game. Can you execute upon the simplistic form that defines it? And that is simply the silo having 1 magnet, the UFO having all 5, and the stacks being the stacks. I can't really say a lot for this one for now. But with the silo, for example, as long as it's able to suck up disks after being slid across the table, it does the job that you want for user testing. So if you're able to do this, you've done a pretty good job with your design. Now, the UFO, for example, we've got 5 different magnets here. How is that going to interact differently than with the silo? So you might slide it, and as you can see, it doesn't have the smoothest angle because there's a lot more weight and a lot more resistance, and also I just didn't do a great job of making the model, but there's always room for improvement there. So if we slide this, once again, you can see it's doing the job that you want to do in the simplest way. Now, the stack is probably the example of where I failed in building a prototype. I wanted to try to increase height every time to make it harder to sink a magnet in the highest slot, thus rewarding you with the best shot, the highest score. But I made the stacks too high in general and tried to compensate by making it into a sloped stack. And ultimately, I failed and decided to pull this out of playtesting in the first round. That is okay though, because there were still parts of the game where just simply talking about the model instead of playing with it led to a helpful conversation about magnet height. How do we want that to influence play? And as you can see, different users reacted differently to certain situations, and I think that's always a good thing to have. So even if you're failing in some cases in trying to bring a model to life, you're still learning things. Don't be afraid to fail forward and fail quickly too. That is why rapid prototyping is so important at this stage of learning. We don't want to invest a lot of time in an idea that just might not work out. You learn so much more when you're willing to do things quickly and adapt. So keep that in mind as you continue to design. Okay, let's kick off playtesting feedback, starting with the silo here. The first thing that the playtester said was this was a super simple, easy, and straightforward design to start with. It explains the game in the simplest terms of sliding a target across the way and then trying to get your pucks underneath it. Now, what they didn't anticipate was, while this design does look quite straightforward, the 3 entrances actually offered more of a challenge than they expected. You see, the walls here cover a similar amount of area around the base, meaning if you didn't properly slide the tower to face you with an opening, you'd kind of be screwed in that first round. Until they learned something that I wasn't even anticipating, was that the tower could actually be moved. Because of its lightweight design, the pucks had enough momentum to actually rotate it to open up the entrances to face the players more often than not, which meant more chips became used for offense instead of just target practice. So say you had a missed shot earlier, you could in theory move the base under another puck to have it get sucked up, or use it to move the base to open it up for later shots. And this was very unique and a good reason of why we play test in the first place. Okay, so we're on to the UFO here. And I know you can probably tell I may have broken it while I was coming back from a party this weekend, but it's okay. We got the learning that we needed. So what did we actually take away from the earlier playtesting session? First of all, more magnets means more things getting sucked up or abducted in this theme, and that leads to more fun. But also, with more magnets, there's more weight, and I kind of talked about that when touching on the silo, which meant less movement, which is also less fun in the playtester's eyes. Now, this contrast offered kind of different base experiences, which was good for prototyping. Now, also along with more magnets, weird magnet physics. And what I mean by that is when a puck would be approaching the outer magnet, it would actually affect it in a flywheel manner, where it would get pulled in, but instead of getting sucked up if it was moving too fast, the polarity would actually then push it away, accelerating it through the entire row of magnets. And this would happen at each point, only to move the magnet even faster throughout the entire process. So instead of actually getting to the middle of the base, you'd go flying right past it, thinking it was a good shot, only to be very surprised and then disappointed. So thinking about the magnet physics, one of the feedbacks here were to maybe try 3 surrounding magnets instead of 4, allowing them to be a little more spaced out and open up the entrances to the central magnet a little more. Now, along with that, the supports needed to have more intentionality. Placing them here limited their approach to the center and also just didn't feel cohesive with the overall design, especially when we talk about how would a UFO look. So in the next round of prototyping, I'm hoping to cure a lot of these problems that came up and approach them with a different mindset and design. So that's the UFO. Let's move on to the general themes. Okay, so let's get into the overall feedback and findings across the 2 different prototypes that were play tested. So first and foremost, starting with the snapping of the magnet, that auditory feedback when it gets perfectly directly under the tower and it goes, that was extremely satisfying for the play testers. That is something that rewarded them with a little dopamine hit saying, you did a good job and here's what you're looking for to do it again. Now, in addition to that, people also wanted to see the abduction happen, going with the UFO theming. Now, with the silo, it was very straightforward because there was only one magnet. So you could assume that when you heard that sound, it had gotten sucked up by the tower. But with the UFO having 5 different magnets, it was harder to track which part it went up into. And along with different scoring, there was a question of, did I make it into the center? How does that influence the rest of the strategy? And you don't want to pick up the tower and move the pieces around in order to see that. So showing off the abduction would be a solution to this in the next round of prototyping. Now, I talked about scoring a little bit. Each of the games had a slightly different way to score multiple points. You get 2 points for scoring directly in the silo and then 1 point for being the closest, as opposed to the UFO where you'd get 3 points for being in the center and only 1 point for the outside, and no points for being closer because so many magnets offered a higher likelihood of getting sucked up. This allowed people to play different strategies, which led to more fun and more competition. So they liked that and they wanted to keep that in the game moving forward, with maybe even a couple of new ways to score as well. Now, in addition to this, let's talk about the chips. They were a little bit difficult to slide. This was probably the biggest pain point across all the playtesting. These were made using actual poker chips that I found in my basement. This is not something that's made to have a lot of frictionless interaction with the surface it's sliding on. So in the future, making sure it's a much smoother design will lead to a much smoother experience. Lastly, let's talk about the theme here. UFO being called a UFO actually drove a lot of the conversation. Silo did not really have a huge draw into why it was called that. And once we got into the ideas of alien invasion, things getting sucked up, it just made more sense to run with that. But they took it in a different way than I was expecting. The playtesters actually suggested that aside from just having the UFO, call the UFO the mothership. It has the most magnets, it has the most firepower, therefore let that be one theme, and let there be a sub-theme of the silo becoming a smaller UFO, maybe a probe, maybe a drone, still kind of playing around with what that name might be. And that way you have a continuous theme across both designs while having unique ways to play each of the game modes. And I thought this was really creative, and I really appreciate everyone's suggestion when it came to this, because our playtesters did a great job of building upon each other's ideas to keep the flow going. Now, along with this, the pucks would actually have different themes on them for the farmers and the cows. And this way, people will be able to see what the opponent is sliding to have a better idea of which side their magnet polarity is. Because right now, we were simply doing green on one side, white on the other, and then red and blue on the opposing team. Thus, teams had to think a lot more of, does red correspond to green, does white correspond to blue, which led to overthinking in a game that's meant to be quite simple at its premise. So overall, all of these different findings were crucial to this next stage of prototyping that I'm about to enter, and I appreciate everyone's feedback that came to do the playtesting. Now, for you in the audience watching right now, if you're not in Minnesota and didn't have a chance to attend, feel free to comment down below what your thoughts are. I always like to take feedback from everyone, and I think it makes the game better for everyone involved as well. So without further ado, I'll see you next week and hopefully have a new round of prototypes to show off. See ya.